All right, friends. Welcome to another edition of The Whole Story in 16 Verses. And we're going to pretty quickly here be wrapping up our Old Testament verses, moving forward into the New Testament. And before we do that, just let me reflect really quick on the last passage we talked about, Ezekiel 37 and the dry bones. If you think about that story with the dry bones, that's really about the power of death being overcome or being promised to be overcome by God. And death itself was a massive obstacle in the Old Testament. The power of death, going all the way back to Passover, the power of the angel of death who came and took the firstborn children of Egypt, and the way in which God provided a means out of that death. All of that is pointing forward to something that God promises to do throughout the Old Testament, and that is overcome death itself. How does he do that? We will see. You probably know the answer already. But secondly, beyond just death itself, which is a big enough problem, there is this other problem throughout the Old Testament that you see repeated over and over again. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here real quick and give you the beginning of my slideshow, which jumped into the middle for some reason, but we're going to be looking at Isaiah 53, verses 5 to 6 today. And if there's a passage that is more impactful on my life than this one, I don't know what it is. And I'll share that in just a little bit, what exactly that means. But Isaiah 53, 5 to 6. What I want to do is talk to you just for a minute about the three primary Hebrew words in the Bible for sin, because the big problem I'm talking about, even apart from the problem of death itself, is the problem of sin. And what is sin? Not something that everybody likes to talk about these days, not something that everybody believes in these days. As a matter of fact, you ask a lot of different people in the world around you, and I encourage you to do this. Ask people at Thanksgiving dinner what they think of what's wrong with the world, right? What's the problem that is facing us? And people will say things like selfishness, or lack of education, or lack of love, or maybe they'll say psychological issues. Out there in the world, we're kind of being taught on a regular basis that whatever is wrong with us can be solved by some means. So see a therapist, go get some good medication, deal with those things, start exercising, go and learn how to meditate, go and get educated, read more books, take more classes from the right people who believe the right things. And all of these are sort of saying that the problem that we see in the world of humans being the way they are can be solved in some way by some means. And so in the Old Testament, we have three words that frequently get translated sin. And the way Hebrew works, there's roots, and those roots can be adjectives, verbs, nouns. But this is kind of the root words that equal lots of other words. But here they are. The first one is chata. It's kind of fun to say that one, especially this time of year and everyone's sick. Chata is easier to say, but chata. And basically what that means is missing the mark. It's actually an archery term. This is the Greek word frequently translated sin is hamartia, and that means the exact same thing. This is kind of like the big overarching definition of what sin itself is. Sin itself is anything that is outside of the bullseye, that is the standard of God. And the archery illustration is pretty clear. It was pretty obvious. Those arrows are all missing, right? Missing what? Missing the mark. What's the mark? Well, the mark is the character of God, what he has asked us to do and to be. And we miss it for so many reasons, but missing the mark, the primary problem that the Bible lays out with the human race, is that we miss the mark. Now, that sounds very almost like it's not our fault. And you'll often hear this kind of get explained away by people sometimes, and they say, oh, sin is just missing the mark, so just trust that you can do better tomorrow than you did today. or just trust that God doesn't think it's that big of a deal, because we all miss the mark, right? So, but this is actually painted in the Old Testament using two other terms as very, very serious indeed. Missing the mark is not just kind of just a innocent little thing that human beings do, and they can't really help doing, so you shouldn't be too upset about it, or you shouldn't judge, or, that's kind of the general sort of perspective we see out there. So let me give you those two other words that are frequently sort of lay at the roots of things. And the first one is pasha. So what does missing the mark look like? Well, it's not just an innocent mistake. It is willful. So in other words, chosen rebellion against God. Now, against God or against other people, it can be used either way, but primarily when it's wrapped up in this idea of sin, pasha is rebellion against God. Ezekiel 2:3, for instance, says that Israel rebelled against God, and that's why they were led into exile. There is another verb that's connected to this that means essentially departing from a path. The idea that there is a way to walk, a way things have been laid out in this world, and human beings, in their very nature, frequently, constantly push back against that path, walk upstream of that path, or step off of that path. Human beings in the garden, for instance, were told any one of these trees you can eat from, and it will bring you life. But don't eat from this one tree. All of this you can have, this one thing you can't have. That's the principle of the way, the path. God's saying, it's all there for you, but it's going to require one thing of you, and that is to resist eating from this one. Like, I'm not saying you can't have anything. You can have lots of good things. This one thing you can't have because it will kill you, is what he says, which is the one they get tricked into eating for a variety of reasons. Well, it's the one that they can't have. That's pasha. That's pasha. I read today, it's crazy how the news just kind of helps enforce things, right? I read today that Princeton, which is an Ivy League school, right, that people who are very influential and powerful go to in order to become influential and powerful people. So the kids of influential and powerful and rich people go to these schools, or people that have really good grades that want to go and make an impact in the world go to these schools, and they've started offering courses in let's just say sexual expression of oh man, I don't even know how to describe. I don't want to describe it. Scriptures tell us to be careful how we describe evil. But courses on deviant sexual behavior, let's say that, things that would make your toenails curl, pornographic things. These are Ivy League schools offering courses to undergrads on these subjects, viewing them almost as these, like an integral part, an important part of character formation and education for young people, to learn about these different sexual proclivities. That's a good word, proclivity. Your kind of personal preferences or choices when it comes to sexuality. When God has laid out what the path of sexuality should look like. And so we celebrate rebellion in our culture. Heck, on some level, I mean, we are the product of a rebellion, right? And of course, the American Revolution is this thing that we're grateful for and thankful for, right? But when you come out of revolution and rebellion, it's kind of in the blood a little bit, right? To rebel against authority. And so I think, at our very nature as Americans, we sometimes have a hard time stepping in line with authority. And God's authority is the greatest and most powerful of all authorities, and we frequently push back against it. So rebellion, pasha, opposing God to his face, shaking a fist at God and his ways of doing things. I think it sits at the core of so much of what we struggle with today. There's another word as well. Avan means iniquity. Iniquity translated means gross wickedness or maybe gross injustice perpetrated on another person. This one is used actually 200 different times throughout the Old Testament, if you can believe that. Based upon that frequent usage, we come to the conclusion that it refers to both iniquitous acts, so wicked acts, but also the way we see it used, it actually could mean the guilt that accompanies those acts. So the thing that weighs on our hearts, even people who claim to not feel that still have it somewhere deep down inside. And then the inevitable consequences or punishment that must result from that iniquity. Iniquity is kind of a catch-all word to describe all kinds of wicked behaviors. I put here the 7 deadly sins on a sign there: pride, lust, greed, envy, sloth, wrath, gluttony, those things that traditionally have been associated with sin in the church. But iniquity covers all kinds of things. There's a story in Genesis 11 that talks about the Tower of Babel. And the Tower of Babel is an example of both rebellion and iniquity, because the people decide that they want to build a tower to the heavens that's greater than God. They want to ascend beyond God and go higher than him. It's rebellion, like the core of rebellion right there, through and through. What the scriptures tell us actually was the first sin that Satan, the fallen angel, that he perpetuated against God. He wanted to be in the place of God and be higher than God. Christian tradition that kind of speculates on those stories about the devil would say that actually he was so jealous of human beings having such a high place in God's sight that he, in his hatred, wanted to rebel against God, because human beings are so special to God, made in his image, right? But iniquity as well, the things that stem from a culture that is rebelling against God, gross wickedness, you name it. The things that we celebrate and hold up as valuable, the things that people perpetuate against each other in the world, of course, you can see every single day if you really look at the news. But beyond that, the way we live our lives opposed to God inevitably results in iniquity happening. So we're these guilty ones. And in the book of Isaiah, which is all about, in the midst of exile, this prophet bringing the word of the Lord and promising both judgment and future hope. We get to these passages throughout Isaiah, the 40s of Isaiah, and then into all the way to 57, kind of spread throughout there. But Isaiah 53 is the one that is kind of, I say, probably the center of maybe the entire book of Isaiah. And I just want to read it to you. Sorry, internet's slow here. That's why I'm a little distracted, but I'm trying to pull this up as we speak. Isaiah 53, I'm going to read out of the NIV, and I'm going to start at the very top. So Isaiah 53, and we'll get to the part that we want to hone in on. Who has believed our message, and to whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed? He, this kind of mysterious figure that's just been introduced, he, this servant person that we don't really know who it is, he grew up before God, like a tender shoot and like a root out of dry ground. He had no beauty or majesty to attract us to him, nothing in his appearance that we should desire him. He was despised and rejected by mankind, a man of suffering and familiar with pain. Like one from whom people hide their faces, he was despised, and we held him in low esteem. Surely he took up our pain and bore our suffering, yet we considered him punished by God, stricken by him, and afflicted. Now, real quick, it's talking about this person as though this is something that's already happened, but nothing like this has happened. So this is what we would call a prophetic visionary passage. This is God appealing to the prophet Isaiah, giving him a picture, like a narrative, a story unfolding in his heart and his mind before him. And he writes it down, the story that he sees, and it's the story of this figure, this person, who apparently is not anything to look at, who that people actually don't care to look at because he doesn't look that good. And it's like someone that people turn their back on. They want nothing to do with him, and he suffers. And because he suffers and goes through the pain, they turn their back on him and they say, oh, God must not like him. He must be afflicted by God, they say. So it's like this picture of this person who is apparently righteous, is apparently loved by God, but people think he's hated by God because of what he's going through. And then we get to this part that I want to share with you. But he was pierced for our transgressions. He was bruised for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was on him, and by his wounds we are healed. We all like sheep have gone astray. Each of us has turned to our own way, and the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. He was pierced, not because God hated him. He was pierced for our transgressions. He was bruised for our iniquities. There's a punishment. How can a punishment from someone else bring us peace? That's what he says happens. The punishment that brought us peace was on him, and by his wounds we are healed. All these contrasts. How can wounds heal? How can punishment bring peace? How can someone be pierced for transgressions? Now, really quick, let me just show you the language here. Here's the language. He was pierced for our pasha, our rebellion, the ways in which we have shaken the fist at God and turned against him. He was bruised for our awen, both those words in there. He was bruised for our iniquities, right? The punishment that brought us peace was on him, and by his wounds we are healed. We all like sheep have gone astray. Each has turned to our own way, and the Lord has laid on him the awen of us all. There's those words, different words that encapsulate the whole picture of sin. God has put all of that on this person. It's this picture of substitution happening, a substitute. And we've seen this all the way through the Old Testament, from Passover. Abraham, we see actually the story of Abraham going to sacrifice Isaac, and a substitute is found. A ram is given to Abraham instead of his son. We see this in the book of Exodus with the Passover, where a lamb is killed and the blood is put over the doorframe, and the angel of death passes over, and death spares that family because of the substitutionary death of that lamb. Now we see this person, this vision of this person who is going to take upon himself everything that everyone has ever done, that Israel first has ever done, but later we'll see everybody has ever done. Take it upon themselves, and through that taking upon himself, the people will be healed. They will have peace brought to them. He will be bruised for what they have done, but they will receive the benefit from it, despite the fact that they all like sheep have gone their own way and turned away from him, because the Lord has laid on him our iniquity, our wickedness. Now, how wicked are you? I think you can actually determine in a large portion how actually connected to the reality of being a Christian, of Jesus, you are, by how much you recognize your own wickedness in your heart, your own propensity to twist and turn and rebel and do ill towards others and think ill towards others. Is it in you, or do you just see it in other people? We all, like sheep, have gone astray. Not a small deal. Each of us has turned to our own way. The Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. All of those things that Israel, and consequently us, have done, has ever done, have been laid on him. If you ever read The Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens, there's kind of a brief overview of the story. There's two people, Sidney and Charles. They look alike. They don't know each other, but it turns out they're almost identical. Sidney is sort of a drinking noble person, and Charles is someone who is noble and kind and has a family. And Charles is sentenced to death in the French Revolution, and Sidney steps into his place, has him knocked out and secreted away, and gives him his identity and takes on Charles' identity for himself and goes to the guillotine in place of Charles. And there's this beautiful passage at the end, where a young woman who's in prison to be executed as well is talking to him, and she looks up and sees his eyes and recognizes that it's not Charles she's talking to, it's Sidney. And she says to him, "You're dying for him." And Sidney says, "Yes, for him and his family." He says, "Please don't say anything." And she says, "If I can hold your hand, I think that'll give me the courage I need when I go to die." Something about that dying in place, taking on something that you don't deserve, that's not yours to take on, substituting and sacrificing yourself on behalf of somebody else so that they can live, so that they can have peace. There's something about that that inspires us, that gives us hope, that does something in our hearts that is, I'm getting the shivers talking about it. And at the very end, before he goes to the guillotine, the famous line he says, "It is a far, far better thing I do than I have ever done. It is a far, far better rest that I go to than I have ever known." And it's the idea that there's some things that are just good to do. There's a righteousness associated with dying in someone's place. And this is a person who's not a good person. And somehow in the midst of this, he redeems himself through dying in someone's place. How much more then is the one who has never done anything wrong stepping in and dying on our place? How much more courage can that give us? The one who's not trying to redeem himself, but through him we are redeemed because he has not done anything wrong. He's despised and rejected because of his goodness. He's ignored and turned away from because he's so pure. Because he is so full of love, the people hate him. Because he sees the truth in them, they reject him and despise him. Because he is innocent, they hate him and they kill him. But it's through that, only through that, that we can be brought to new life. It's only through that that our sins can be washed away as far as the east is from the west. Friends, if a person, the story of a person dying in somebody else's place can be inspiring, and this story has inspired how many? So many people. And whenever we hear stories like that, they inspire us. Why? Because they point to an ultimate reality, the truth of what Christ has done for us. I'll never forget the first time I ever saw this movie from that I have the picture here from, The Passion of the Christ. You know, it's a movie, the only movie that focuses specifically on Jesus' death and the punishment and the suffering that he received for us. You know, some people criticized it. They called it torture porn. That was a word that was used to describe it. Oh, it's over the top. It's an ordeal you have to sit through and endure. Friends, when I was in my early 20s, struggling because I had just gone through the process of thinking that a girl I was dating was pregnant, and I wasn't sure what I was going to do with the rest of my life. And so in the midst of that, I cried out to God, the God I had known when I was younger, but had rebelled against and begun to do wicked things in spite of. Doing whatever I wanted, turning to my own way, pursuing whatever feelings, whatever thrills I wanted to experience. And I cried out to him and said, "Please help me." And word had come that I wasn't going to be a father. And the weight that kind of lifted off of my shoulders, but also that feeling, that sense, it was that week that this movie came out, right around Easter time, actually. And I went and saw this movie with friends from church that I just started to connect with. And out of that, it was like the whole thing landed on me. That this is the one that the Old Testament that I'd grown up hearing about. That this had all been prophesied long before, that God had actually laid this out to the prophet Isaiah, that he had said, Isaiah 53, here's what's going to happen. And it was like those things came together. The movie Passion of the Christ opens with this Isaiah 53, 5-6 quotation. Something happened in my heart when I saw that. It's like the substitutionary death of Christ for me suddenly became real to me. I felt it for the first time, my own wickedness. I saw in his wounds everything I had ever done, thought, perpetuated, anything I had ever carried out in my own will that was wicked. I saw in his wounds all of that laid upon him. And then, in the midst of that, after that, in the aftermath of it, I experienced the peace and the healing that can only come through him. I surrendered to him. I laid my heart out to him and said, it's yours now because I have done such a horrible job. Would you please take it and do whatever you want with it? And it's really that peace that has led me to this moment, being here with you. Life has never been the same again. And of course, there's been failures and falls and all kinds of things that could potentially be looked at and said, you're not walking in peace. You're not walking in freedom. But when I gave my heart to him and I gave my life to him, I set myself on a path that was going to be different than the path that had been walking on. That's the thing I want to encourage you today. There's a lot of people out there who think that because you make a mistake, that means you must not be a good Christian. And actually, it would actually be a sign that we don't understand this message if all of us were just sitting around and just being, the best possible people all the time. If only good people who have everything right and who do everything right came to the church, I don't think that would be a very Christ-centered church, because by being Christ-centered, by putting this message at the center of your life, you are acknowledging that you aren't that person, that good, amazing person who does everything right. You're saying, I can't do everything right. I need someone to do it for me. I need help from the outside coming in. That's the message that we have been given, that it's help from the outside coming in, that he has had it laid on him so that we can receive what he has for all eternity. And friends, you will struggle. Despite knowing this message and despite taking it into your life, you will struggle. You will have temptations. You will have battles. You will some days feel like you're taking 10 steps back. And then some days you feel like you're taking 10 steps forward. You will struggle with anger and rage and lust and temptations and envy and a feeling of inadequacy that leads you to do and say dumb things that you wish you hadn't said or done. You will struggle with all of these things, anxieties and fears and depression and all of the things that human beings living in a sinful world struggle with. But at the heart of it, there will be this truth sitting underneath everything that says, this is not the end. This isn't what I was made for. The culture we live in says if you struggle with something, that's who you are, so you may as well just stop struggling and embrace it. Give up, just quit struggling, quit fighting, quit resisting the temptation. Embrace the temptation, live it out. And that's a message that has hoodwinked and stolen the life from many, many people, including many people I know. The Christian life is one lived in opposition to those natural instincts and desires, that pasha and that awan, that aven that come after us, that try to twist us and move us in these different directions. If you're fighting, you're still in the game. If you stop fighting, that's when I get worried about you. So friends, don't stop fighting. Don't stop resisting. Let this truth land on your heart and your mind so that you can experience those small little pieces of freedom that he says you will experience when you walk with him. Maybe it's just a little bit, and then maybe tomorrow's 10 steps back. But friends, you can promise that if you are on this path, walking with him, that if you have received Christ, you are a new creation. The iniquity has been laid on him. You don't have to bear it anymore. So there's always hope for tomorrow. Tomorrow is always a new day. No matter what this day has brought, there is always something else that can happen tomorrow that can push you further down that path of eternal life. So friends, I encourage you today, rest in that truth. Acknowledge this truth. This is the part of the story now where we begin to look forward to that stable, that holy family, that baby in the manger who came into the world for this purpose. That baby became this you see in front of you. May we never forget that. May we always hold that close to our hearts and may we be transformed by its amazing truth. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.